first off, thanks everybody for joining. I know that we have a group here that's really excited to talk about what I'll say is the never-ending, and I'll say always progressing topic of prospecting into your large account base. Now, this webinar is titled Prospecting into Enterprise Accounts, I know, but I'm sure we have folks on here from different company sizes within different segments, and it really doesn't matter what company you're at, what segment you're in. What we want to focus on today is how you can target, research, navigate stakeholders and message into your most strategic accounts, no matter what segment you're in. And the ultimate goal coming out of this is hopefully you can pick up on some nuggets to find new pipeline, win current opportunities that you're current in, and ultimately growing your customer base and starting with the prospecting phase of that. So real quick, we'll get into the panelist introductions here in a minute, but for those of you that I don't know, my name's Eddie Hansen. I lead our team at Prolific. And for those that aren't familiar with Prolific, we help Salesforce customers organize, navigate their strategic accounts, which is why we're really excited. And we talk about this topic regularly. So we help make that process much easier for any B2B selling organization that is doing key account management and account planning, which is traditionally done in PowerPoints through a quarterly business review, through a shared Google Doc, and many other mechanisms that we've seen. And our idea is we want everybody to be doing that within the walls of Salesforce. Now, I've also got three experts on the panel here with me today who are going to be sharing their best practices. Hopefully we can hear some personal wins where they've struggled, and hopefully the audience, like I said earlier, can take away a few nuggets to start getting after those accounts. I know it's mid-year or almost to mid-year for a lot of tech organizations at least, and hopefully you can take away some pointers coming out of this to take a step back, take a deep breath, and really relook at your territory and target accounts that you're prospecting into this year. So we'll kick it off with some introductions. First, we'll just go from left to right. Tom, if you want to introduce yourself, then we'll get to more. And over to Jack, if you want to introduce yourselves and your companies.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Eddie. Excited to be here. I'm Tom Malemo, based out of Chicago. I spent about 8 years in SaaS sales. Most recently, I was at Gong until the beginning of this year, where I started my own business called TA Sales, which runs boot camps for SDRs and AEs to right now, the first one that we're doing is all about prospecting and building out some other ones later. So I'm excited to be here and contribute and learn from these two smart guys as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, my name is Moore Asulin. I'm a former VP of sales for really early stage startups. Took them from 1 million to about 4.5 million in under 18 months, and then scaled them up to 10 million AR, 15 million AR. About 19 months ago, I launched my own sales coaching, consulting, advisory firm for early stage startups and account executives. So I have my university specifically built for AEs. It's a coaching program. And then I have my consulting B2B side of the business for early stage startups. So what else do you want to know? Oh, fun fact. My first job out of college was a sales job, and I quit on the first day because I was scared of sales. And, here now in sales.
I love it.
Cool. And then I can close us out. I'm Jack. Eddie already introduced who I work for. I lead the go-to-market team at Prolific. I've been at Prolific for the past 5 or so years, really going on this journey with Eddie, coming from Salesforce, and once again looking to solve the pains that come with not just building an account or opportunity plan, but actually executing against that, which is usually the part that people forget about when they build them. They usually just sit in their computers until their bosses tell them to open them up again. So excited for the chat today, and yeah, thanks.
Great. Thanks, Jack. And I think you're controlling the deck. Do you mind popping into the next slide?
Yes, sir.
Great. Well, obviously, before we get started, those that were not able to join, maybe some colleagues, friends, you guys will all receive recordings, everybody that has registered for this. So if you feel like you missed something, you'll get a follow-up email from our team today or tomorrow. And also, we want to answer your questions. If questions arise as we are sharing our content, we'd love for everyone to stay engaged. We'll try to monitor the chat the best we can and get every single question answered before we wrap up today. So if you want to go to the next slide real quick, we'll get into what we're going to cover. So the first thing we want to discuss is just the power of research. And we'll just start with this topic before we get into targeting, building those relationships, and ultimately what I think everybody is going to crave towards the end is how do we create the message? How do we send impactful messaging and while we're navigating a prospect account? So when we think about research and account intelligence to kick today off, I personally, as a seller in the past, this is what overwhelms me the most. It's I've managed a lot of different territories, some larger than others, and I'm sure we have many people on today's call that have 100 accounts, some that have 50, some that maybe just have a handful of accounts, prospect accounts that they're navigating. And it can become very overwhelming to decide where you are going to be spending your time because as a seller, as a sales leader, your time is your most valuable asset. So I want to go through the panel and just talk about and discuss really the significance of thorough research in the prospecting process and where you get started once you identify that target. So Tom, if you want to kick us off, one thing I'm curious about is once you identify that target, maybe you can take a step back as to how you identify those prospect accounts. Where do you typically begin the research phase? Is it strictly information gathering? Are you bringing action into the researching phase? I'd love to get your perspective there.
Yeah, so I tend to base research off of 3 areas. So the first being, if we even take a step back into, the ICP and the personas that you're selling into, and especially if you're new at a company, to actually write down and really get intimately aware of what are the problems that these people have before they buy your product or service, right? And I can share it with folks after. I have a Google sheet that I use of really identifying what are the key problems that each persona that we sell to has, the symptoms of those problems, the impact it has, and how we solve them. And that kind of helps me on my process, and that'll help as we get later to step 3 of like, how do you actually prospect into those accounts? But I think there's the research at that level, which is coming from, really just understanding your buyer and learning about the trends that they care about. Then I get into the account level research, right? So this could come from public things like, reading a 10K or press releases from public companies. It could be getting into a company's website, their LinkedIn, your own CRM to see like, have you closed lost opportunities? Have you had conversations before? Have they engaged with your marketing content, right? You're trying to create like a point of view of what's going on in their business that might make them a good target for you, right? So for example, I used to sell at Gong, and if a company was massively growing their sales team, that's generally a good target because we help to reduce the ramp time. If they just laid off their whole sales team, that's a terrible target. And then the third level of research I go to is then to get into the individual level, typically using Sales Navigator as like a key way to find those contacts, try to identify who are the key contacts I need to go after, contact databases, things like that. And then trying to, create like a more personalized point of view of like, who might the people be to reach out to that care about this particular topic. So I'll leave it at that for now.
No, that's great stuff. More if you want to provide your perspective on where you get started or maybe some insights as to what you personally do as well.
So I'm 100% with Tom in terms of the buyer persona. I have like a weird passion in copywriting. I love copywriting, but if you study copywriting and marketing, the entire like the premise of it all is who's your buyer, what's the pain, what pain do they have, where do they hang out, and then what do they want to solve. And as a salesperson that loves copywriting, I take the same approach. So most people that are on here are probably in a company that already have won deals in their pipeline. So what I would do, and the way I've done it, is I look at all the deals that I have won or the company has won. I'd run a report on majority of those deals that were won. Who's the buyer persona? Who's the official title of the person that was involved? What are the other people that were involved? Maybe they're individual contributors. Maybe they were account executives, whatever it is for your business. Then I look at something else beyond the buyer persona, and that's what I call, or not what I call, but buying scenario, and that is the specific use case that that buyer persona was in. A very common buying scenario, we'll use Gong as an example. I remember I was a VP of sales at a software company and I was evaluating Gong and a few others. My buying scenario was I was brand new to solution, meaning I wasn't using Gong. I wasn't using a competitor to Gong. I wasn't even using Zoom recording. I was using no solution. And so my buying scenario matters because I'm going to carry a certain weight of FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt with it. So someone that's not using any solution and now they're evaluating Gong for the first time, or Salesforce for the first time, or Prolific for the first time, they're more sensitive to budget because they're not spending anything on a solution. So they're very sensitive to budget. They're very sensitive to ease of use because again, they don't use anything. And so I want to understand, based out of all the deals that I have won, what was the most common buying scenario? And within each buying scenario, I want to know what problems do they have? What do they want to solve? And then I'm going to sort of map that out as far as who I'm going to reach out to. Maybe it was a particular industry, maybe it's a particular title. The other thing that I'll check out when I'm doing research, and it sort of maps back into actually prospecting, is I want to know if they're active or where they're active and what they're active on. So specifically social media. Most of them are active on LinkedIn. Are they posting? What are they posting about? This gives me insight into sort of like prepping my prospecting for them. So just a couple of things I'd look into.
Yeah, no, I love the buying scenario. There's a lot of organizations that have great resources, marketing collateral around specifically customer stories. This is an industry, or this is the type of customer that has done business with XYZ company, but taking it to that next level as to why they purchased and relating that back through the research that you're doing on LinkedIn and what they care about. That's amazing. So love that insight. Jack, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think, both great comments in regards to where to start, right? Look at where you've won, look at why they purchased. I'll just call out, I think it's also important to look at in that list of customers that you've won in, and you start to then look at, all right, what companies are similar to them. Start looking in your CRM. Have you engaged with them in the past? And if you have, and they've lost, why was that? Are there differences in their go-to-market approach in terms of how they support customers, their sales cycles, et cetera? Because there are things there that can ultimately qualify yourself out very quickly and save you some time. I also don't want to forget about your question, Eddie, which is just around, well, do you take any action in the researching phase? And I think there's value in understanding the different roles that buyers will play in the process, and starting to see, all right, for us, just speaking from what we sell, account planning is usually pushed by leadership, but experienced in the pains by a seller, right? Those are the ones that are going in and building plans. So my research wasn't just validating an ICP, but it was saying, all right, I'm going to start calling into some of the users that are experiencing these pains, understanding what are they using, how is their leadership pushing this on them, and what business outcomes are they being asked to deliver through it. And then that's stuff that you can use to formulate very tailored messaging to the actual buyers in your deals. That's beyond just, hey, looking at your 10K, or beyond just looking at information that's publicly readily available.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think just as a secondary question and this is for the group, whoever wants to speak up, I've heard things like LinkedIn. Obviously, LinkedIn's an amazing technology to use while prospecting. Tom, I heard you mention 10K, going and finding the 10K. What are the top company initiatives for this year? But does anyone have any reliable resources or technologies that might not be overly popular, but have worked for you in the past and that you rely on when it comes to prospecting? Any data sources or anything like that?
Good question. I mean, I feel like I use, I'm trying to think of ones that are like way outside the box. Like I think any sort of like a contact provider. I see ZoomInfo in the chat, Lusha, there's plenty of contact providers. I think something that's interesting is, I know I'll get like scorned for being the first person to mention AI on this webinar, but I'll do it. That it's a very solid way to synthesize a lot of information. So imagine we're talking about enterprise accounts. At one point in time, I was managing 3 accounts. I was managing Microsoft, IBM, and Salesforce at a company. That's who I was selling to. And there was probably thousands of people, marketers at those companies that I could have sold to, and endless amounts of public information about those companies, right? I could spend all week just reading about Microsoft or, so taking those long reports that are 60 pages that I don't understand half the words, and you put it into a source like ChatGPT and tell me what are the 5 key takeaways for what their goals are for the year. That could be something that's interesting. So synthesizing like long reports to try to come up with like the point of view that you have. Similarly around like an ICP, if you get like a bunch of data from Gartner or Forrester around here are the top priorities of CISOs in 2023, I don't want to read that whole thing. Just tell me like what are the top takeaways, and then I can go apply that to what I sell. So I'll take all the booze and like rotten tomatoes you can throw at me because I brought up AI and ChatGPT, but I think it's helpful.
That's great. It's the new era of selling. So thanks for bringing that up. And where I want to transition to a little bit is I think research and collecting data. It's looked at in a lot of ways of just doing that on your computer, finding data resources and gathering as much intel and organizing that in an efficient manner. But what I've typically found most successful is once you get a meeting, and that meeting could be a 2-minute cold call, that meeting could be a meeting that you set with an individual contributor, is doing the research and gathering stakeholder insights through asking the folks that are sitting in that seat. So I'd love to hear from the team how you bring action once you secure a meeting or once you catch somebody on the phone and doing the research, and what your approach is once you've earned somewhat of a coach or somebody that's open to giving you the research that you're craving. So More, Jack, do you guys have any perspective in how you do research while actually integrating yourself and having those conversations with an organization?
Is this on a cold call?
Yeah, cold call, or maybe somebody will give you 15 minutes.
Well, on a cold call, I haven't done a cold call in a long time, but when I did do cold calling, I usually cherry pick the 3 main problems that my particular ICP that I was calling was having. And everyone probably in the room would probably heard this, but it's like, hey, typically when I speak to a VP of sales, they're having 1 of 3 challenges, A, B, C. Which of those resonate most in your world? Like that's the level of research I'm doing. I'm not trying to go, when I was doing cold calling, I wasn't trying to go so deep on a cold call. I just wanted it to be interesting enough for them to say, yeah, let's set up another time. So the point of the cold call wasn't to pitch, it wasn't to sell, it was to really see if there is validation there and then book for another appointment. If I have a 15-minute discovery call already booked on my calendar, then in that case, I'm sharing, there's 2 different things. You can share the research that you found with the prospect on that call, which most salespeople try to do, but that's not so interesting. The more interesting thing from a prospect perspective is how you've connected the dots from that research. So Tom was talking about like synthesizing. Try to be like a ChatGPT of some sorts when you're talking to your prospect. Tell them how you've connected the dots, and then maybe share some insights based on your research. Hey, I noticed that you hired a bunch of SDRs in March, but you slow down on AEs and you've released a new feature recently. Like try to come up with some hypothesis of what's going on and then ask them if that's aligned with what's happening. It just shows that you're doing your homework beyond just, hey, here's the research. Is it true? Yes or no?
Yeah, that's great. Jack, how about you?
Yeah, I would just build off of my comment from, the proactive portion of researching, and that's engaging with, the lower level portion of your buyer personas. So once again, that for me was, all right, I'm going to start calling account managers. I'm going to call other sellers, and I'm going to see what that process looks like. And it's really easy when you make that cold call to say, have them answer, and they say, I'm not involved in the buying process, and then they hang up, right? So like what I learned to do is I just say, they'd answer, listen, I know you're not involved in the buying process. Just deflect that right off the bat. I'm not asking for any more time than 2 minutes, but have that 1 question or 2 questions that you're looking to validate. I'm just curious, do you guys do account planning, or do you guys do opportunity planning today? Yes or no? And then let them answer that and see if you can get small wins in those lower level engagements that can start to pile up into a true point of view that you deliver to somebody that actually you want to speak with for longer than 2 or 3 minutes. So rather than, hey, typically VPs of sales are having their teams do, plans and disparate tools like PowerPoint, it's, hey, I know that your team's doing account planning in PowerPoint and following this methodology. Let me find a few minutes to tell you how I can make that process easier, more reportable, et cetera. Like that to me is how I would start to use those small interactions as a means to build into more impactful ones with mid to high level stakeholders that can truly move the needle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I really like your approach here. Instead of just like sharing your hypothesis based on previous interactions with other VPs of sales, you're already penetrating that account through the lower level. They're not even decision maker; they're probably end user at some point, picking their brain, and then when you jump on the call with your decision maker or stakeholder, whatever it is, like, hey, I spoke with some folks in your company, and I know that blank. So it's not coming from a place of theory or hypothesis, it's coming from a place of pure validation. I really like that.
Yeah, and if you can add up, you're not making too many asks of a seller. You say, hey, are you guys verticalized, and what's your sales cycle length? You get that from somebody. Like you get 3 or 4 connects, compile that information, and all of a sudden you can have that qualifying doc that you have for the big grand introductory call has been filled out already, and you're coming in with that understanding, and it's validating rather than trying to understand with that
Yeah.
statement.
Yeah, that's great stuff. Thank you guys. So we'll pivot a little bit. We've already discussed a little bit of this topic, but targeting and segmenting enterprise accounts. At the beginning, I mentioned the most important thing that a seller has is their time and what they're going to do with that time. So we've talked about things like research, how you're identifying these high target accounts, and I've been guilty of it to where I think based off of my research, I'm going to spin my wheels, and spend a lot of time in what I think personally is a high target account, which ends up turning into absolutely nothing. So when you are prioritizing target accounts, Tom, we'll start with you. I'd love to hear what's proven successful from you in the past. How do you have clear focus on your prospect accounts and have a clear understanding of how you can consistently push and pull new accounts, and what types of things make you walk away from a potential prospect account? So ultimately, how are you managing your time once you've identified what those target accounts are?
Yeah, I think the act of prioritization is very underrated as a salesperson, and where you spend your time matters. One deal with the perfect customer could be worth 20 deals with, average or below average customers in terms of, the value or the size of the deal or whatever it may be. I found that a lot of times folks will prioritize only based off of, like firmographics, like, hey, I'm just going to, all these big accounts are going to be my A's, and I'm going to segment them just by size, because who doesn't want to sell to Walmart or to Amazon or to Microsoft, of course. And not to say that those can't be great targets, but I think there's a lot more that can go into who should be your A versus B versus C. So part of it could be, who looks like our current customers, right? Whether it's company size, whether it's the industry, whether it's, the location, depends on what you're selling, of course. And then who is showing like triggers from their business that actually show that they might be a good fit. That could be some of the other research that we talked about before. It could be, something on a personal level, like, hey, there's someone above the line that was a former customer of one of our, or, former customer of ours that just landed at this account. Okay, that should be someone that we should prioritize. Do we have some prior engagements with them? We're working with their competitors, things like that might identify to me as kind of a green flag that I want to prioritize this account versus others. And I think spending the time, like, I would say at the beginning of every quarter, like spending the first day or half day, like really planning things out and replanning. Here's my A versus my B versus my C accounts, and here's why. And then every quarter that's going to change, because you're coming up with a hypothesis. You don't know everything. And then as you're having conversations, you say, okay, these folks are actually a C. but now this thing just happened. Now this company that was a C, now this is an A, and I'm going to put my intention and my focus there. So I've always picked like a percentage, maybe, it depends how big your territory is, but maybe 10% that are like your A, that if like I could get one of these, or like I could get these on board, I don't care whatever else happens in my territory, like I'm going to hit my number, and kind of like, whale accounts. And then, you have like 40-50% are like your B's that you think are good fits. And then the rest I don't pay much attention to. I just say, hey, if something inbound happens for my C accounts, that's cool, but I'm not going to use my focus on them.
Yeah, no, I love it. Two things that really resonated with me that I've seen work for our team and others in the past is, number one, always be managing your network of folks that leave organizations and go to another company within your ICP. That's some of the simplest prospecting that you can do based off of previous relationships. And the second is something that you can be doing while doing customer success work with your customers. Every positive interaction, you should be asking for some sort of reference within somebody else's network. Those are going to be your highest converted meetings that you're going to have, and typically with the trust coming from somebody within your network and the recommendation, those are typically great sales calls and great meetings that you can secure. So thank you for your perspective there, Jack. More when it comes to you guys and time management and how you're managing your A, B's, and C's, or whatever you're calling them. Can you provide some perspective on time management?
Sure, I'll jump in, Jack, unless you want to go first.
No, please go ahead.
So I'll answer this with a personal story of mine. So when I launched my business about 19 months ago, we just had our second child. My wife just had our second child, and then we found out she was pregnant with the third. So in terms of time management, I had to really figure out where am I going to spend my time during the day. And I remember when I launched the business, I had maybe 2 months or 1 month worth of runway before I had to dip into my savings or find a full-time job. For me, finding a full-time job and dipping to my savings were equally as bad as shutting down the business. So I told myself I need to close 3 accounts, and my type of deals were more enterprise. I had to close 3 accounts in 1 month from pure prospecting. I had nothing. I had no relationships. I had nothing built out because I just started. And so prior to that, I remember I was just like sending out cold emails to anyone, like any B2B SaaS company. And I was like, hold on, this is not working. I need to dial this in, think very like strategic Navy SEAL style of prospecting. And so I looked at my sort of resume and I said, well, what industries have I played in? I played in legal tech. I was a VP of sales at a company called Practice Panther, very well-known company in legal tech. I played in B2B SaaS e-commerce, company called Okendo. And I played in a few cybersecurity, but Okendo and Practice Panther, I had a very good run there as VP of sales. So between e-commerce and legal tech was a little smaller, so I can probably penetrate there. It's more sort of like everybody knows everybody in that industry. And so I said, okay, let me look at a bunch of legal tech companies that are early stage, pre-Series B, Series A, seed stage, that are hiring for salespeople, but don't have a VP of sales. That was a very specific target because I knew what issues they were dealing with because I was in that situation. I found very few that fit that model. I cold emailed them exactly what the CEO was probably thinking. Like, hey, Seth, you're hiring for a bunch of sales rep. I couldn't see that there's a VP of sales. Is it founder-led sales? Are you like helping the reps? Long story short, I ended up having like 2 discovery calls off of 1 cold email that ended up becoming like a $40,000 plus deal in less than 1 month. Long story short, I ended up closing 3 deals in 1 month using that strategy. But the takeaway there is my version of A, B, and C. Tom was saying A, B, and C. So 10% of your A's would be like your whale accounts, like the ones you like. That would be like the lottery. I don't look at it that way. I look at A, B, and C as more so. A would be which deals or which accounts would be highest probability to actually penetrate. Like which one would I have more success in actually booking a discovery call or having a demo? B would be like less likely, and C would be like, I'm probably not likely, but why not? And so I focus on the A's because I'm most likely to reach out to those accounts, most likely to be successful. And those aren't like let me blast 1,000 emails. That's like surgically sending out maybe 5 emails in one day and that's it. But the success rate of that is very high. The other thing I'd look at into when I'm carving out the time, ideally, is let's say I found the list of accounts that are tier 1 or A that are highest probability for me to penetrate. Out of those ones, which one do I have the most mutual connections with the ICP? So maybe I know Jack, and Jack is very close to the CEO of this one company. I'm going to prioritize that account because I know Jack. That's how I would go about it.
I absolutely love that personal story. And I know every person on this call doesn't necessarily they haven't started their own business or own their own business, but technically they do within their territory. And you were experiencing a very stressful situation. Most sellers are experiencing stress on a daily basis. How am I going to hit my number, especially in the current economic times? But what resonated with me is you taking a step back and saying, rather than trying to do everything and prospect into everyone, I need to have focus, and that focus obviously paid off for you. So that's truly incredible, and I think a big takeaway for everyone that's managing a territory on this call. Jack, we'll have you wrap us up just when it comes to how you manage your time and focus when it comes to your prospecting accounts and maybe your team's prospect accounts as well.
Yeah, I think from my side, it starts with I tiered my accounts. It started with research. You know, at the tier 1, it was, all right, I need to have messaging that is hyper specific to them. And it's really easy to say, oh, I'm going to make 15 accounts, tier 1 accounts. But is it realistic for you to put hyper specific messaging, depending on the size of the accounts that you're managing, and do the right things in the way that more you just described across 15 accounts, or is it 5? And you need to be realistic with yourself, and you almost need to qualify that account in to why you're prioritizing spending time doing research and tailoring messaging. Tier 2, it was more role-based, industry-based stuff, but not going through the weeds of those accounts, looking through every single, how do I get my foot in the door through mutuals and stuff. But I think that I would always try and convince myself, like, why am I actually saying this is an account I'm going to go after? And if I couldn't sit there and give myself a handful of reasons based on what we knew were the right things, there's no way that I'm keeping it in there. And then second to that, it's not written in ink. When you go through a quarter, when you go through a year, to what Tom had shared, you need to be able to push things out and pull them in. And you need to be understanding of what outcomes you really can expect to see in some of the accounts based on how big they are. If you're going after Walmart and you're only going to prospect into them for 2 weeks, I mean, unless you got some AI GPT style thing that's going to like change their world, I don't think it's going to happen, right? Those accounts take time, and you need to be able to stick with them. Everybody wants to find the whale accounts, but does everybody want to go through the deep sea of the ocean and then figure out where the heck they are? That's the part that I think people talk about wanting to do, but when it gets into practice and you're not seeing a result a month, 2 months in, you're like, I'm going to start going elsewhere. So what are you trying to get out of these? Be realistic with how many tier 1s you identify and how much time based on the size that they are and the maturity of your business as well that you think it's going to take for you to get there.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. All three great perspectives. There might not be an answer, but one of the toughest things to do in sales is to walk away, and it's a lot tougher to walk away from a current opportunity that you're working on. But are there any stories that you guys have had in the past that you've identified the hottest prospect in your mind, and whether it was through a conversation you had with somebody, or maybe you were just spending too much time, when and how you decided to walk away from what we'll call one of those tier A accounts that you guys are referring to?
Trying to think a story off the top of the dome.
I put you guys on the spot, so we'll table that one. If it comes up later, it'll come up later. Well, I know probably the majority of the folks on this call want to get into the meat, which is, okay, there's been great ideas and great stories as to how this collective group have done their research to identify their target accounts, really tier out their A, B, and C accounts. But then it comes to action. What am I going to message? How am I best going to spend my time in the creative process of getting different types of messaging to different personas across an organization? So Tom, maybe we'll start there. I'd love to get your thoughts on what your personal creative process is, and maybe it's not just creative process. You mentioned AI earlier and how AI is helping with messaging. Just ultimately, your best practices of figuring out the message, mixture of volume versus quality while prospecting, and really just what works best for you.
Yeah. So a lot to unpack there. I feel like there's kind of two ways that I go about prospecting. One is that, it takes it's kind of like you're chopping down a tree, right? Every time you hit the tree with an axe, you don't know if it's going to be the first swing or the 500th swing that actually knocks the tree down. But I do feel like if you're consistent enough and you make enough quality attempts, that you can knock the tree down. And so let's say if I'm prospecting into an enterprise account, what that looks like is, I'm going to send quality messages to the personas that I think are both above and below the power line. So if I was trying to sell to, I've never sold security, but if I was selling to security to a bank, I might hit up the CISO. How likely is the CISO at Wells Fargo to respond to me? Probably not very likely. So I'm going to also send messages to people, below the power line at the manager and director level. I believe in, mixing up the vehicles of email and call, and using social media if that's where your buyer is, and using video if your buyer, is interested in that, perhaps sending direct mail, and doing that consistently over time, finding mutual connections, things like that. I also think in the world of like these big accounts where it's not transactional at all, you got to go outside the lines a little bit. And so like the biggest deal that I ever sold was to Tableau Software back in the couple of years ago, and they got bought by Salesforce for like 6 billion or something. But I was selling marketing technology, and we could never crack into this account at my company. And so I had a podcast that I was doing, and it was not about marketers, but I decided that I was going to try to have their chief marketing officer on my podcast. So I reached out to her, got her on the podcast, flew to Seattle, did the podcast, had a great conversation, was building a relationship with her, then sent said podcast to a bunch of different marketers that were, more influential on the team, that were actually like the doers of like, hey, I'm building a relationship with her. She had all these great insights. Would you ever be open to, kind of chatting and taking a meeting? And then, that got my foot in the door, did a paid pilot, then closed a $400K deal. And then the next year closed a $1.53 million deal, which is the biggest in my career. And so it was like the unique podcast. And then like, while we got our foot in the door with like a land deal, like we were doing a bunch of weird stuff. Like we were doing like donation drives with them at their office, at their headquarters, and like all these very unique things, like putting time and effort and soul into that account, because I knew if I just have this account hit off, like I don't really need anyone else, maybe a couple other deals, but like that was what I needed to hit my number and to exceed quota. And so I think there's something to be said about going above and beyond for those like tier ones, those low hanging fruit, like what Moore was saying.
Absolutely incredible. I love those stories. Sounds like just being yourself and passionate about what you're selling and what you're solving for, and that resonating across a lot of marketers, and going and putting yourself out there, and willingness to go do that with a CMO and fly out there to do a podcast. That's incredible, and gives you a lot of assets to send to other organizations down the road. So I love it. More, Jack, any perspective on your messaging approach?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you why. One of the reasons why I think that worked for Tom, and why most people should do it. Most salespeople are cold prospecting in order to build familiarity, when they really should build familiarity first in order to cold prospect. So right now, if I wanted to prospect into Jack or you, Eddie, I'm more likely to, if there's me and a competitor of mine, you've never heard of them, and I'm trying to prospect into you and maybe pitch sales coaching, whatever it is, I'm going to be more successful in landing an appointment with you than someone you don't know. Why? Because we've done this before. And so you don't necessarily have to do a podcast, because that takes time. But what I'd recommend very strategically, and I do this to prospect today, that works for me, is it's sort of an account-based marketing tactic or strategy, is I will make a list of accounts that I want to penetrate. And this is also on Salesforce, not Salesforce, on LinkedIn. And then based on the people within those accounts, certain ICPs, I will filter those people based on their activity levels. So I will only save them really in a list in Sales Navigator if they are active on LinkedIn. The definition of active is they post weekly or daily. That is definition of active. And why do I do that? So that I can engage with them on LinkedIn, not like, hey, I love your post, but maybe challenge one of their posts, ask a question, or share an insight. And I do this for a few weeks without prospecting. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I'm building familiarity first. After a few weeks, during that few weeks of engaging with their content, maybe a DM back and forth, we'll see. I'm looking for a couple of things. I'm looking for them to engage back with me, either on my post or my comment or question on their LinkedIn post, or for them to DM me saying like, oh, loved your question, or hey, or even for them to view my profile. For me, that's an indicator that they're paying attention. I'm not prospecting yet. I'll do that for a few weeks. Then after a few weeks, I will send them a cold email. And that cold email, the subject line would say, hey, Jack, it's more from LI. And then you open up the email, hey, Jack, we've loosely engaged on LinkedIn on your post, blah, 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 blah. And then I'll segue into my essential cold email pitch. I'm more likely to be successful doing that than going straight for the cold pitch and then sending out like a bunch of sequences with value adds. I'd rather do the value add first, play a little longer game, and then cold email them later on. That's worked for me. And that's my tactic of like building familiarity first in order to cold prospect. Tom did it with a podcast. If you have the budget and your company has it, then do a podcast and invite your ICPs into that podcast. If your company's cool with it, if it's a relatively large enough deal, fly out to record the podcast there. Once you're face to face, I mean, oh my God, the level of rapport build that you can build is insane. So that's what I would do.
Great. I love it. Thank you. Jack, over to you.
I'm starting to wonder more if I'm in the middle of a sales cycle right now while I'm on this podcast.
This is all intentional. This is
Yeah.
you're wondering how we all got here.
I love it.
Are you Bant or no?
I mean, I guess we'll find out here in a few minutes. I gotta let Moore send me a cold email in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
And Tom, I'm gonna wait that invite to your podcast. You know, I'm just joking.
Yeah.
No, I think both very great comments, and it comes familiarity. What that does is it helps you cut through the volume that is created at every channel that buyers are operating right now, right? LinkedIn, it's like you go to your emails, connect requests, everything's like, we work with B2B business in this space. It's like everybody's leading with what they want to do, which is sell you, rather than delivering some value and genuinely like being a person about it. Like the past 20 cold calls I've gotten, it's like typically when I speak with VPs of sales, it's you haven't even asked me whether I'm still the VP of sales. Like I just think it's interesting. Sometimes people always come in and they just want to sell you right away. And there's something to be said about more your approach, which is like you're gonna get familiar with who I am and how I go about things. And then it's more of an open-ended offer a lot of times, right? And that's how I approached it. Hey, listen, I know we've gone back and forth, or we've had a couple good discussions. If you're open to chatting, or if there's ever a time where you hear about sales planning being a focus, like I really hope you think of us. And that's not necessarily trying to like close somebody on, hey, can I get 30 minutes on your calendar? If that's your only way of identifying a win when you're prospecting, then you're only going to win, what, 1 out of 100 times. Like you could start to increase your margins with just genuinely caring about serving them, helping them, and not just thinking about the outcomes that you're always like measured on up front. Those will come if you do the right things over time. So those are just a couple comments off of what you guys shared. And the other thing that I'll say is like when I begin prospecting, and something that I've really enjoyed working with Andy, our head of marketing, is we're measured on the same thing, and he is more than willing to work with my team when needed on accounts. So we're looking at intent data, we're looking at opportunities that are in flight, we're creating top of funnel messaging that he's putting out to people that are at that business that are well beyond people that we're speaking with. So don't think about this prospecting effort as something that's just you or you and your BDR. The more that you can get your team involved, the more you can use your whole resources. You obviously have to justify those asks, but there's criteria in my team internally. Hey, if you have a deal over a certain size, we want our marketing team to come in and support that at the top of funnel, see if we can get any further engagement. is one other thing. And then I was thinking about this when we were talking about the past topic, but I want to bring it up now, which is when you're calling into people down segment, your tiered accounts, tier 1 accounts, and you are, oh, I no longer work there. The amount of times I've heard people say, okay, I'm going to hang up. That's like my favorite thing to hear in the whole world. Because if I find somebody that doesn't work at that business, I'm like, okay, well, hey, do you mind if I ask a couple questions about while you were there? Gonna get some info. Usually people are pretty comfortable sharing info about who's the decision maker, what they follow, what tools they use when they got no skin in the game anymore, right? So that's just one comment I'll make generally when prospecting. If you hear I'm no longer with the business, don't let that be your out to hang up the phone. See if you can still get some info out of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, one quick add on that, if you don't mind, Eddie,
Sure.
what you were saying, Jack, about, asking for intros and things like that. Like, I know I was with, at an event with a group of like 25 sellers and sales leaders over the weekend. And some people were talking about like having like kind of like someone mobilized on the team that can like, help with deals to get intro to investors, to get intro to, other people in like a community, that might be able to like find introductions that way. So even if your VP of sales isn't connected to their, decision maker, are there investors of your business that are mutual or that have connections? Are there other people that are supporters of your business or evangelists or, fans or anything like that? And like having, if you can afford to have someone that like helps to do that as one of their main roles, or just like, if you're a rep listening to this, hey, can I spend like an extra 10 minutes and look at our investors, look at all these other people that care about if we succeed, that again, if the deal's big enough, they will do that. That was a pretty big strategy at Gong as well. Like if it was a certain dollar amount, yeah, we can get C-suite. Yeah, we can get investors. We can get all these other groups of people from the board, involved to help kind of penetrate into an account.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, but both of what you guys said, you hear often during a deal cycle is never win or never win alone and never lose alone. That all of that should translate into prospecting as well. If you've uncovered certain data points around a tech stack, are you getting your solution engineer involved? Is there synergies across the C-suite or executives or board members? If you've done the legwork and put in the effort to find out specific information, don't take that information directly to every single persona across the organization. Make sure you're multi-threading, you're doing relationship mapping to engage the relevant stakeholders internally with the relevant stakeholders at the prospect that you're focusing on. So amazing points. I think it's about time to wrap it up, guys. We've got about 51 minutes of really good content. I hope the group collectively is taking away some really strong nuggets to take back to all of your individual territories. But I'll give the panel just the platform one last time. One, just with any closing remarks that you may have on any topics that we haven't covered related to prospecting. But two, I'm sure with the group that we have here, there will probably be some individual questions that may get asked, and the best way to reach you, best way to reach your company. We'll end it with that.
Cool. Yeah, I guess I'll kick it off. My final parting words are, I'm a big Tony Robbins fan, and his like success formula is, you come up with a strategy, you take massive action. If it's working, great, do more of it. If it's not, find another route. And sometimes in prospect, it could feel like, oh, more, I've tried everything. You probably tried like 4 things, right? So like think outside the box, expand. We gave like 27 different examples of things to do. You don't need to do all of them, but try one thing, go hard on it and see if it works. And if not, try something else. There's always a way to break through. So that's my message on that. You can hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm very active and would love to chat with anyone interested. I'll throw it in the chat.
I'll add to Tom's. I like Tony Robbins too, but I'll add to Tom's point. You can do the right thing, but not do it enough times, and you may give up too soon. So especially with prospecting, especially for larger accounts, it takes time to like roll the thing up the mountain. It takes time to build momentum. It's like I can tell you for sure, for me starting the business, it was like that. It still to an extent is like that. And so sometimes you just need validation that you are doing the right thing, and you just need someone to tell you, just do it a little longer. That'd be my tip. And then as far as where you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can check me out on my website, demotoclose.com. If you're an AE and you want me to help coach you, then all the information is there. If you're a startup and you need help, then all my information is there. If you have any question that pop up around prospecting, whatever it is, shoot me a DM.
Thank you.
I'll
Jack,
close it.
want to close us out?
Yeah, I would just say, I think it's just building off what they said. It's really, really easy to get into a place with prospecting where you don't feel like you're successful. Yes, you need to give it time. Yes, you need to change your messaging, but you also need to be realistic about what your wins are. And those wins are not always going to be meetings. They're not always going to be qualified opportunities. You need to go into the day saying, this is how I win the day. And if you're able to complete those things and then leave and be excited about it, always try and get better. But I think the times where I was in the worst place as a seller was when I was just entirely measuring my success on, like how much, closed business I had, when I had awesome conversations and meetings that were culminating in good deals down the road. Do the right things daily, celebrate those small things. Because it's really, really easy in this profession to get bogged down by the big number that you got on your back when you start the year.
Can I leave off another note? I just want to add to what you're saying, or
Please.
just in prospecting in general. The easiest way to put it this way: when you're a buyer, you're more likely to trust a friend that refers you someone else or some business than you are a cold email or a cold call. I try to book a couple of demos a month with other softwares and other vendors and services. Number one, to just see what else is out there, but also to see myself as a buyer, to get the buyer's perspective. Otherwise, we're too much in this like sales head. And so my advice to you, if you're prospecting into account, is instead of trying to go cold, try to go warm and find a mutual connection that you can ask a referral for. There's a cool, you can either do this manually on LinkedIn, but there's a cool software that I'm testing out. And no, this is not like an affiliation, or no, they didn't tell me to do this. It's called cosell.io. I think it's Brandon Cassidy. But it's an app that lives on LinkedIn that shows you your mutual connections and has like a little like template that you can send out a cold email. You can do that manually, but always ask for a referral if there is a mutual connection. It's just so much easier to penetrate an account that way.
I love it. I love it. Well, first off, thank you to the audience for joining, for interacting. I'm seeing an active chat. Second, amazing content by all three of the panelists. Thank the three of you for joining us. And like I mentioned, if anybody has individual questions, please feel free to reach out to myself, all of these panelists. We're happy to help wherever we can, and happy hunting to everyone, and good luck the rest of the quarter and the rest of the year. Cheers, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Later.
Everyone.